An Ohio college student who didn't want her mom to know she failed out of school brutally killed her when she found her on the phone with the university. Brenda Powell was hit with a cast iron skillet and stabbed dozens of times. But now, in a stunning move, an appeals court has overturned her daughter Sydney's conviction, giving her the opportunity for a new trial. This is a law and crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? And research is potentially leaking ultra-processed foods to these outcomes. Morgan & Morgan is stepping in to fight to hold food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they're ready to stand up for families who deserve justice. If your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, visit www.forthepeople.com/food to learn more. Sydney Powell was just 19 years old when she attacked her mother Brenda inside her Akron, Ohio home in 2020. She has never denied killing her mom, who was a 50-year-old nurse to cancer patients at Akron's Children's Hospital. But her defense attorneys have always maintained that Sydney was in the middle of a psychotic episode when it all happened. Before we get into what an appeals court had to say about Sydney's conviction, let's rewind back to March of 2020. Police responded to a request for a welfare check and found Sydney in the driveway. Officers reported that her eyes were rolled back and she was clawing at the pavement. Meanwhile, Brenda was inside with severe injuries. She was rushed to a hospital but passed away. A month later, Sydney was indicted for her mother's murder as well as felonious assault and tampering with evidence. She eventually entered a not guilty plea by reason of insanity, and her father supported her, begging prosecutors not to file charges. During a pretrial hearing in 2023, Steve Powell said, quote, "I don't know why we're doing this. This isn't what anyone wants here. I don't know how she can handle it. I don't know how I can handle it. I'm trying to keep my family together." Before her trial, Sydney had been released on bail and was living with her grandparents. Her family told the court that they had hoped that arrangement could continue and that Sydney could keep getting treatment. 3 pretrial evaluations determined that Sydney was not sane at the time she killed her mom. But an expert for the state disagreed. Prosecutors chose to go ahead with Sydney's trial. In a statement emailed to the Akron Beacon Journal, prosecutor Sherry Bevan Walsh said, quote, "We have the utmost sympathy for Brenda Powell's surviving family members. It's unimaginable and tragic to lose a loved one to violence under any circumstances, much less when the violence is caused by another family member. In the interest of justice and the community, we believe the case is best resolved by presenting a fair and impartial jury with all the facts and letting them decide the outcome." During the trial, we learned more about Sydney. She graduated a year earlier from high school with a 3.8 GPA. She earned a partial academic scholarship to the University of Mount Union in Alliance, Ohio. But when she started classes, her roommate says her mental health started to deteriorate rapidly. She was sleeping 16 hours a day and failed 3 out of her 4 classes. She was put on academic probation and eventually expelled from school. But she didn't tell her friends or family that she had gotten kicked out. According to court documents, on March 3rd of 2020, Sydney's dad got a call at work from Mount Union, letting him know that she was no longer enrolled. He saw in a tracking app that his daughter was at their home. He went to their house and she told him she was frustrated that her friends seemed to have their lives all figured out while she had not. Her dad told her she should talk to her mom about it and asked Brenda to come home while he went back to work. Brenda Powell told coworkers she needed to go home to deal with a problem involving her daughter, and that was the last time they saw her. According to testimony heard at trial, once Brenda got home, she called Mount Union to try to figure out what was going on with Sydney. 2 deans from the university were on the other end of the phone when they heard thuds and screams. They say Sydney then got on the phone pretending to be Brenda before hanging up. The school administrators called in that welfare check, leading officers to the Powell home and the shocking crime scene. According to prosecutors, Sydney hit Brenda with a cast iron frying pan and stabbed her repeatedly in the neck with a steak knife. Psychologists who testified on Sydney's behalf said she was out of touch with reality when she killed her mom, who said she was more like Sydney's best friend. The expert testified that Sydney had flashes of that day, things like sitting next to her mom on the couch and then feeling the need to get away. She also told psychologist James Reardon that she remembered voices in her head saying things like loser and worthless. The next thing she knew, she was waking up at the hospital with minor injuries, but her mom was dead. Dr. Reardon, who examined Sydney for 8 to 10 hours over 2 days, testified he believed this was the first episode of schizophrenia. In his report, Reardon wrote, quote, "I have rarely, if ever, seen a situation where an individual was in an utterly compromised psychological state as Sydney Powell was at the time of these offenses." Another doctor testified that Sydney was completely, totally out of her mind. In total, 3 psychologists agreed that Sydney was not guilty by reason of insanity. But the sole medical expert for the prosecution testified that Sydney was not experiencing full-blown psychosis before killing her mom. In the end, the jury found Sydney guilty on 2 counts of murder, 1 count of second-degree felonious assault, and 1 count of third-degree tampering with evidence. A Summit County, Ohio judge ordered her to serve 15 years to life in prison, and she's not eligible for parole until 2038. But a new ruling from the 9th Judicial Court of Appeals could mean a change is on the horizon. The court's decision the day after Christmas reads, quote, Sydney Powell appeals her convictions in the Summit County Court of Common Pleas. This court reverses. So here's their reasoning. According to the appeals court filing, before trial, Ms. Powell moved the trial court to permit her to call witnesses to rebut the state's anticipated expert testimony related to the not guilty by reason of insanity defense. The trial court denied the motion during trial, but before the state expert testified. After the state expert testified, Ms. Powell renewed the motion, arguing that her experts could have rebutted specific points related to the methodology used and conclusions reached by the state's experts. The trial court denied the motion again, concluding that Ms. Powell had lots and lots and lots of expert testimony in this matter. The court wrote that one expert witness the state called, Sylvia Obradovich, went beyond just giving her expert opinion. She also described her own methodology and offered pointed critique of Ms. Powell's experts, characterizing the basis of their expert opinion as both fundamentally flawed and irrelevant to the question at hand. Considering that Dr. Obradovich did not include the critique in her expert report and the state's cross-examination of each expert was minimal, it may well have been impossible for Ms. Powell to do so in any event. Ms. Powell's proffered rebuttal, therefore, would have been evidence given to explain, refute, or disprove new facts introduced into evidence by Dr. Obradovich. This court therefore agrees that once the state's expert had testified, the trial court erred by denying her the opportunity to present rebuttal testimony. The appellate court ordered the Summit County Court of Common Pleas to carry this judgment into execution, which likely means Sydney will be granted another trial. So far, no word on when that might happen. So for now, Sydney is incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, Ohio. A stunning win for Sydney Powell, seemingly. Let's bring on now trial attorney Diane Menashe. Diane, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, you're from Ohio and know this case very well. What's your reaction to the appeal court reversing Sydney Powell's conviction, and are you surprised by